The helicopter's rotors cut through the desert air like thunder, carrying 6 wounded Navy SEALs toward the military hospital in Kandahar. Staff Sergeant Maria Santos stood ready in the trauma bay, her hands steady despite the chaos around her. She had seen hundreds of wounded soldiers come through these doors. But something about today felt different. The first stretcher rolled in carrying Lieutenant Commander Jake Morrison, his leg twisted at an unnatural angle. Blood soaked through his tactical vest and his breathing came in short, painful gasps. Behind him came 5 more SEALs, each bearing wounds from what Maria could tell had been a brutal firefight. "What happened out there?" Maria asked the flight medic as she began cutting away Morrison's gear. "IED followed by small arms fire," the medic replied, sweat dripping from his forehead. They held their position for 6 hours before extraction was possible. Maria nodded, her focus entirely on Morrison's injuries. She had been a combat medic for 8 years, serving 3 tours in Afghanistan and 2 in Iraq. Her hands moved with practiced precision, checking vitals, assessing wounds, preparing him for surgery. But as she worked, she noticed something unusual about these SEALs. They were all watching her. Not just casual observation, but intense scrutiny. Their eyes followed her every movement, studying her technique, her confidence, the way she handled their wounded brother. It was as if they were evaluating her, measuring her against some unseen standard. Morrison's eyes fluttered open as Maria inserted an IV. "You've done this before," he whispered through gritted teeth. "Many times," Maria replied, checking his blood pressure. "Just focus on breathing. We're going to take good care of you." As she prepared Morrison for surgery, the other wounded SEALs were brought to adjacent beds. Despite their own injuries, they continued to watch Maria work. She could feel their assessment, but she pushed it aside. Her job was to save lives, not worry about what elite soldiers thought of her abilities. The lead surgeon, Dr. Hammond, arrived and began examining Morrison's leg. "Extensive fracture, possible nerve damage," he muttered. "We need to get him to OR immediately." As the surgical team wheeled Morrison away, Maria turned to the next patient, Petty Officer First Class Danny Rodriguez. Shrapnel had torn through his shoulder, and she could see bone fragments beneath the torn flesh. "You're good at this," Rodriguez said, as Maria began cleaning his wound. "Real good." "Thank you," Maria replied, not looking up from her work. "How's your pain level?" "I've had worse," Rodriguez lied, though his face was pale and sweat beaded on his forehead. Maria had heard that line countless times. Elite soldiers always claimed they'd had worse even when facing life-threatening injuries. She administered pain medication and continued her assessment. As she worked on Rodriguez, she became aware that the other SEALs had gone completely silent. The trauma bay, usually filled with the groans of wounded soldiers and the chatter of medical staff, had taken on an almost reverent quiet. Even the nurses seemed to sense the change in atmosphere. Chief Petty Officer Marcus Thompson, who had taken shrapnel to his torso, was staring at Maria with an expression she couldn't quite read. It wasn't pain or fear, but something closer to recognition. His teammate, Petty Officer Second Class Kevin Walsh, had stopped complaining about his broken ribs and was watching Maria's hands as she worked. "Where did you train?" Thompson asked suddenly. Maria glanced up from Rodriguez's shoulder. "Fort Sam Houston, like every other Army medic." "That's not what I mean," Thompson said quietly. Something in his tone made Maria pause. She looked around the room and realized that all 5 conscious SEALs were staring at her with the same expression. It wasn't curiosity anymore. It was something deeper, more profound. "I trained where I needed to train," Maria said carefully, returning to her work on Rodriguez's wound. The silence stretched on, broken only by the steady beep of monitors and the distant sound of helicopters bringing in more casualties. Maria could feel the weight of their attention. But she had learned long ago to compartmentalize. Whatever these SEALs thought they knew about her, her priority was treating their wounds. Dr. Hammond returned from the OR prep. "Santos, we need Rodriguez in surgery too. That shrapnel is closer to major vessels than we initially thought." As the surgical team prepared Rodriguez for transport, he grabbed Maria's wrist with his uninjured hand. "What's your name?" he asked. "Staff Sergeant Santos," she replied. "No," Rodriguez said, his eyes intense. "Your real name?" Maria felt something cold settle in her stomach. "Maria Santos is my real name." Rodriguez studied her face for a long moment before releasing her wrist. As he was wheeled away, he called back over his shoulder, "Thank you, Ghost." The nickname hit Maria like a physical blow. She hadn't heard it in 3 years, not since she'd left her previous unit, not since she'd requested a transfer to regular medical duties, not since she'd tried to leave that part of her life behind. The remaining SEALs had heard Rodriguez's parting words, and the atmosphere in the trauma bay shifted again. The silence became heavier, more charged. Maria could feel their eyes boring into her back as she moved to the next patient, but she forced herself to maintain her composure. Chief Thompson's injuries were the most severe of the remaining SEALs. Shrapnel had penetrated his abdomen, and Maria could see that he was losing blood faster than the others. She worked quickly to control the bleeding, her movements sharp and efficient. "How many?" Thompson asked quietly as she pressed gauze against his wound. "How many what?" Maria replied, though she knew exactly what he was asking. "How many did you save over there? In the real fights?" Maria's hands never stopped moving, but her jaw tightened. "I save everyone I can. That's my job." "That's not an answer," Thompson said, wincing as she applied pressure to his wound. Maria looked directly into his eyes for the first time. "It's the only answer you're going to get." The respect in Thompson's expression was unmistakable now. Whatever he suspected about her past, her response had confirmed something important to him. He nodded slightly and closed his eyes, allowing her to work without further questions. As Maria continued treating the wounded SEALs, she was acutely aware that her carefully constructed new life was beginning to crack. The identity she had built over the past 3 years, the quiet existence of a regular combat medic, was under threat. These elite soldiers had seen something in her movements, recognized something in her technique that marked her as different from other medical personnel. The ghost of her former self was stirring, and Maria wasn't sure she could keep it buried much longer. The next morning, Maria arrived at the hospital to find Lieutenant Commander Morrison awake and alert in his hospital bed. His leg was immobilized in a complex external fixator, but his eyes were sharp and focused as she entered his room for the morning rounds. "You look better," Maria said, checking his chart and examining the surgical site. "Dr. Hammond says the surgery went well." "Thanks to you," Morrison replied. "You kept me stable long enough to get to the OR." Maria nodded professionally, making notes on his recovery progress. She had hoped that the intensity of yesterday's trauma bay would be forgotten in the light of day, but Morrison's steady gaze suggested otherwise. "I've been thinking about yesterday," Morrison continued as Maria checked his IV site, "about how you handled the situation." "I did my job," Maria replied, keeping her voice neutral. "You did more than that?" Morrison shifted in his bed, wincing slightly. "I've been a SEAL for 12 years. I've worked with a lot of medics, both Navy and Army. You're different." Maria finished her examination and made final notes on his chart. "Different how?" "You work like someone who's been under fire, real fire. Not just treating casualties who come to you, but working in the middle of it all." Before Maria could respond, Chief Thompson appeared in the doorway. He was walking slowly, one hand pressed against his bandaged abdomen, but he was mobile. Behind him came Rodriguez, his arm in a sling but otherwise looking remarkably well. "Gentlemen, you should be resting," Maria said, though she knew the protest was futile. Elite soldiers rarely followed medical advice about bed rest. "We need to talk," Thompson said, closing the door behind them. The 3 SEALs formed a semicircle around Maria, their expression serious but not threatening. She had seen this before, the way special operations soldiers closed ranks when they needed to discuss something important. "We did some checking last night," Rodriguez said, his voice quiet. "Called some friends, asked some questions." Maria's pulse quickened, but she kept her expression neutral. "I'm not sure what you mean." "Maria Santos, Staff Sergeant, Army Medical Corps," Morrison recited. 8 years active duty, 3 deployments to Afghanistan, 2 to Iraq. Exemplary service record. Multiple commendations for treating wounded under fire. "That's all public record," Maria said. "That's the official record," Thompson corrected. "But there are gaps. 14 months where your service record shows training exercises that don't match any actual programs, medical courses that don't exist in any Army database." Maria felt the walls closing in around her carefully constructed identity. These men had resources and connections that could dig deeper than most people. She should have expected this. "Sometimes records are classified," she said carefully. "Sometimes they are," Rodriguez agreed, "especially when someone spends 14 months training with units that officially don't exist." The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken knowledge. Maria knew she was at a crossroads. She could continue to deny everything, stick to her cover story and hope they would let it drop. Or she could trust these men with a truth she had shared with no one else in 3 years. "What do you want from me?" she asked finally. "The truth," Morrison said simply. "We know you're more than just a regular medic. Yesterday proved that. The way you moved, the way you handled multiple critical patients simultaneously, the way you never hesitated or second-guessed yourself. That's not standard medical training." Thompson stepped closer, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "We think you were attached to a Special Activities Division medical unit. The kind that doesn't show up on any organizational chart." Maria's poker face finally cracked. The mention of Special Activities Division hit too close to home, confirming that these SEALs had access to intelligence networks that could uncover even the most classified operations. "I can't talk about that," she said, her voice barely audible. "Can't or won't?" Rodriguez asked. "Both." Morrison exchanged glances with his teammates before speaking again. "We're not asking you to betray any classified information. We're asking you to trust us with the truth about who you really are." "Why does it matter?" Maria asked, genuine confusion in her voice. "I'm here, I'm doing my job, I'm helping people." "Isn't that enough?" "Because last night our teammate Danny almost died," Thompson said, emotion creeping into his voice. "The flight medic told us that the shrapnel was millimeters from his subclavian artery. One wrong move during initial treatment could have killed him. But you didn't make any wrong moves. You worked on him like you'd done that exact procedure 100 times before." "I have done it before," Maria admitted. "Many times." "Where?" Morrison pressed. "What unit teaches medics to perform arterial repairs under combat conditions?" Maria closed her eyes, feeling the weight of 3 years of careful deception pressing down on her. These men had risked their lives for their country just as she had. They deserved better than lies and evasion. "I was attached to a joint task force," she said slowly, "one that conducted operations in places that don't officially exist. We worked with small teams, usually special forces or SEAL units, providing medical support for missions that required specialized care." "How specialized?" Rodriguez asked. Maria opened her eyes and looked directly at each of them. "The kind where you might have to perform emergency surgery in a cave, while enemy fighters are 30 meters away. The kind where you might have to treat a sucking chest wound while rappelling down a cliff face. The kind where failing to save someone meant the entire mission was compromised." The 3 SEALs absorbed this information in silence. They had suspected something like this, but hearing it confirmed was different. They were looking at someone who had operated at the very edge of military medicine, in situations that most medics would never face. "How many missions?" Thompson asked. 47, Maria replied without hesitation. "Over 14 months. 16 different countries. I was deployed with 11 different special operations teams. Casualty rate?" Morrison's question was clinical, professional. "0 KIA under my care," Maria said, pride creeping into her voice despite her attempt to remain detached. 3 who shouldn't have made it home but did." Rodriguez whistled softly. "That's why they called you Ghost." Maria nodded. "Because I could save people who were supposed to die. Because I could appear in impossible places and keep soldiers alive when no one thought it was possible." "What happened?" Thompson asked. "Why did you leave?" Maria's expression darkened, and the other 3 saw something flicker across her face. "Pain so deep it was almost physical. That's not a story for today," she said quietly. The SEALs recognized the tone. They had all carried secrets that were too heavy to share, memories that were too dark to revisit. They didn't push for more details. "Does anyone else here know?" Morrison asked. "No, and I'd like to keep it that way." Thompson nodded. "Your secret is safe with us." "But Maria..." "Yes? Thank you. For what you did yesterday and for everything you did before. Soldiers like us are alive today because of people like you." As the 3 SEALs left her alone with Morrison, Maria felt a mixture of relief and anxiety. Her secret was out, at least partially, but she trusted these men to keep it. What worried her was what would happen next. Word had a way of spreading in military communities, especially when it involved someone with her unique background. She had tried to disappear into anonymity, but yesterday had reminded everyone why the Ghost had earned her reputation. Now she had to decide whether to continue hiding from her past or embrace the skills that had made her legendary among the special operations community. Word traveled fast in the close-knit special operations community, even faster than Maria had feared. By the end of the week, she noticed subtle changes in how people treated her at the hospital. Soldiers who had never spoken to her before nodded respectfully when she passed. Nurses asked her opinion on complex cases. Even Dr. Hammond seemed to defer to her judgment more often. The breaking point came on Friday afternoon when Colonel Michael Harrison walked into the trauma bay. Harrison was the commanding officer of the Regional Special Operations Task Force, a man whose presence usually meant something significant was about to happen. He found Maria restocking medical supplies and approached with the measured stride of someone accustomed to command. "Staff Sergeant Santos," Harrison said, his voice carrying the authority of rank and experience. "I need to speak with you privately." Maria followed him to an empty consultation room, her mind racing through possible scenarios. Had her past finally caught up with her? Was she being recalled to classified duties? Or worse, was she in trouble for discussing her previous assignments? Harrison closed the door and turned to face her. He was a tall man in his 50s with graying hair and the kind of weathered face that spoke of decades in combat zones. His expression was unreadable as he studied Maria for a long moment. "Lieutenant Commander Morrison's team has been singing your praises," Harrison began. "They say you saved their lives with skill they've rarely seen in a conventional medical setting." "I did my job, sir," Maria replied, falling back on the standard response she had used countless times over the past week. Harrison smiled slightly. "I've heard that response before, usually from people who have done far more than just their job." He pulled out a tablet and scrolled through what appeared to be a classified file. "I've been reading about your previous assignments. Quite impressive." Maria's heart sank. If Harrison had access to her classified records, her carefully maintained cover was completely blown. "I've also been reading about why you requested a transfer to conventional medical duties 3 years ago." Harrison continued, his voice becoming gentler. "The incident in Pakistan. The mention of Pakistan hit Maria like a physical blow. She had spent 3 years trying to forget what happened there, trying to move past the one mission where her legendary skills hadn't been enough. "Sir, I'd prefer not to discuss that," Maria said, her voice barely steady. "I understand," Harrison replied, closing the tablet. "But I'm afraid current circumstances may not give us that luxury." Before Maria could ask what he meant, Harrison's radio crackled to life. "Overlord, we have a situation developing. Multiple casualties inbound, special operations personnel." Harrison keyed his radio. "How many?" 7 wounded, 3 critical. ETA 15 minutes. Harrison looked at Maria, his expression grave. "There's something else you need to know. The team coming in is Delta Force, and they've specifically requested you as their primary medic." Maria felt the blood drain from her face. "They requested me? How do they even know I'm here?" "Word travels fast in our community," Harrison said, "especially when it involves someone with your reputation. These soldiers have been in contact with Morrison's team. They know exactly who you are and what you're capable of." The implications hit Maria immediately. If Delta Force operators were specifically requesting her, it meant they were facing injuries severe enough that conventional medical care might not be sufficient. It meant they needed the ghost, not Staff Sergeant Santos. "I can't," Maria said, backing toward the door. "I'm not that person anymore." "With respect, Staff Sergeant, I don't think that's your choice to make," Harrison said firmly. 7 soldiers are coming in, 3 of them dying. They've asked for you specifically because they believe you're the only one who can save them." The radio crackled again. "Overlord, be advised the casualties include penetrating chest wounds, severe limb trauma, and suspected internal bleeding. Flight medic reports 1 patient has been unconscious for 20 minutes. Maria closed her eyes, feeling the familiar weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. These were soldiers, brothers in arms, people who had risked everything in service to their country. How could she let them die because she was afraid of confronting her past? "What happened to them?" she asked. "Ambushed during a high-value target operation," Harrison replied. "They held their position for 4 hours before extraction was possible. The team leader, Major Alex Carter, insisted on being the last one evacuated. He's one of the critical cases." The name Major Alex Carter made Maria's breath catch. She knew that name. Had worked with Carter's team twice during her classified assignments. He was one of the best operators she had ever met, a man who would never request her assistance unless the situation was truly desperate. "They're not just asking for any medic," Harrison continued. They're asking for someone who can perform miracles under pressure. They're asking for the ghost. Maria opened her eyes and looked directly at Harrison. If I do this, if I step back into that role, there's no going back to anonymity. Everyone will know. Does that matter more than 7 lives? Harrison asked quietly. The question hung in the air between them, simple and devastating in its clarity. Maria had spent 3 years trying to escape the burden of being extraordinary, trying to find peace in being ordinary. But ordinary medics couldn't save the soldiers who were coming in. Only the ghost could do that. I need certain supplies, Maria said, her voice taking on a different quality, becoming more focused and authoritative. Equipment that isn't standard in this trauma bay. Harrison nodded. Whatever you need. I need a thoracic surgery kit, high-speed bone drill, blood products for massive transfusion protocol, and 4 additional nurses who can work under extreme pressure without asking questions. Done. Maria took a deep breath, feeling herself shifting back into a role she thought she had abandoned forever. And I need everyone else to stay out of my way. When those helicopters land, this trauma bay becomes my operating theater. No questions, no second guessing, no interference. Understood, Harrison said, keying his radio. All stations, this is Overlord. We have special operations casualties inbound. Staff Sergeant Santos is primary on all patients. All other medical personnel will assist as directed. This is Priority Alpha. As Harrison left to coordinate the incoming casualties, Maria stood alone in the consultation room, feeling the transformation taking hold. The careful restraint she had maintained for 3 years was falling away, replaced by the focused intensity that had made her legendary among special operations forces. The ghost was awakening, and Maria realized that perhaps she had never really been gone at all. She walked back into the trauma bay with purpose, her movements already different, more precise and confident. The nurses looked at her with new eyes, sensing the change in her demeanor. Dr. Hammond approached, clearly picking up on the shift in atmosphere. Santos, what do you need from us? He asked. Everything, Maria replied, her voice carrying an authority that made everyone in the trauma bay stop and listen. These aren't normal casualties. We're about to find out what we're really made of. In the distance, the sound of helicopters grew louder, carrying 7 wounded warriors who had placed their lives in the hands of a medic they knew only by reputation. They were coming home to the ghost, whether she was ready or not. The helicopters landed with a thunderous roar that shook the entire medical facility. Maria stood at the entrance to the trauma bay, no longer the quiet, reserved medic who had tried to blend into the background. The transformation was complete, and everyone around her could sense it. The first stretcher came through the doors carrying Major Alex Carter, and Maria's heart clenched when she saw his condition. Blood soaked through multiple bandages. His breathing was shallow and labored, and his skin had the pale, waxy appearance of severe blood loss. Behind him came 6 more Delta Force operators, each bearing wounds that would challenge even the most experienced trauma team. Talk to me. Maria called to the flight medic as she immediately began her assessment of Carter. Major Carter took 2 rounds to the chest, possible hemothorax, the flight medic reported rapidly. Lost consciousness twice during transport. Blood pressure dropping despite 2 units of blood products. Maria's hands moved with practiced precision, cutting away Carter's tactical vest and examining the entry wounds. Her training kicked in automatically, the specialized skills she had developed during her classified assignments taking control. This wasn't the careful, methodical approach of a regular trauma bay. This was battlefield medicine at its most intense. I need chest tubes ready now, Maria called out, not looking up from Carter. And get me a portable ultrasound. Dr. Hammond approached with the ultrasound equipment, but Maria had already begun feeling for anatomical landmarks on Carter's chest. Her fingers found the precise location she needed, and she made a quick incision between his ribs. Santos, shouldn't we wait for imaging confirmation? Dr. Hammond asked. No time, Maria replied, inserting the chest tube with swift, confident movements. He's got blood in his pleural space, and it's compressing his lung. Every second we wait, he gets closer to cardiac arrest. Dark blood immediately began flowing through the chest tube, confirming Maria's diagnosis. Carter's breathing improved almost instantly, and his blood pressure stabilized slightly, but Maria knew this was just the beginning. Next patient, she called out, moving to the second stretcher without pause. Staff Sergeant Mike Torres lay unconscious, his left arm hanging at an impossible angle, and bone fragments visible through torn flesh. The flight medic's report was grim. Improvised explosive device blast. Severe limb trauma. Possible traumatic brain injury. Maria examined Torres quickly but thoroughly, her hands checking for signs of internal bleeding while assessing the devastating injury to his arm. She could see immediately that conventional treatment wouldn't be enough to save the limb. "We need an orthopedic surgeon," one of the nurses said. "No," Maria replied firmly. "We need to stabilize the bleeding now, or he won't live long enough for surgery." She grabbed a high-speed bone drill and began working on Torres's shattered humerus with a precision that left the watching medical staff speechless. This wasn't standard trauma protocol. This was the kind of emergency field surgery that most medics only read about in textbooks. While Maria worked on Torres, the other medical staff began treating the remaining 5 Delta Force operators under her direction. She seemed to be everywhere at once, providing guidance and making split-second decisions that meant the difference between life and death. Sergeant First Class David Kim had taken shrapnel to his abdomen, and Maria could see signs of internal bleeding that would require immediate surgical intervention. Without hesitation, she made a field incision and began exploring the wound with her hands, feeling for the source of the bleeding. "Santos, that's incredibly risky without proper imaging," Dr. Hammond warned. "So is letting him bleed out while we wait for a CT scan," Maria replied, her hands still working inside Kim's abdomen. "There, I've got it. Splenic laceration. I can repair this here." What followed was a display of medical skill that none of the trauma bay staff had ever witnessed. Maria performed procedures that were typically done in sterile operating rooms, working with speed and precision that seemed almost superhuman. Her hands never trembled, her decisions never wavered, and her focus never broke. As she worked on Kim, she simultaneously directed the treatment of the other casualties. "Rodriguez needs immediate blood products. His hemoglobin is dropping fast. Martinez has a tension pneumothorax developing. Insert a needle decompression on his left side. Jackson's pupils are unequal. Get neurology down here now." The trauma bay had become a symphony of controlled chaos, with Maria conducting every movement. The nurses and doctors who had worked with her for months were seeing a completely different person. This wasn't Staff Sergeant Santos anymore. This was the ghost in action. Lieutenant John Rodriguez, one of the less severely wounded Delta Force operators, was conscious and watching Maria work. Despite his own injuries, he was studying her technique with professional interest. "You really are her," he said quietly as Maria checked his bandages. "The ghost. We heard stories about you during advanced medical training." "Stories tend to get exaggerated," Maria replied, though her hands never stopped moving. "Not these stories," Rodriguez insisted. "They said you once performed emergency surgery on a Green Beret while both of you were suspended from a rope in a cave. They said you saved a SEAL team leader by performing a thoracotomy with a field knife when your surgical kit was destroyed." Maria paused for just a moment, meeting Rodriguez's eyes. Those weren't stories. By now, word had spread throughout the hospital that something extraordinary was happening in the trauma bay. Off-duty medical staff found excuses to walk past and observe. Senior officers appeared in the viewing gallery above, watching the legendary ghost practice medicine at a level few had ever witnessed. Major Carter regained consciousness just as Maria finished stabilizing his chest wounds. His eyes found her immediately, and despite his pain, he managed a weak smile. "Ghost," he whispered. "Knew you'd be here." "Just focus on breathing, Major," Maria replied, checking his vitals. "You're going to be fine. The others?" Maria looked around the trauma bay at Carter's team. Torres was stabilized and being prepared for reconstructive surgery. Kim's internal bleeding had been stopped, and he was responding well to treatment. The remaining 4 operators had been treated and were all stable. "Everyone's going home," Maria said, and she meant it. As the immediate crisis passed and the patients were moved to various surgical suites and recovery areas, Maria finally allowed herself a moment to breathe. The trauma bay was quiet now, but the atmosphere remained charged with the intensity of what had just occurred. Dr. Hammond approached her, his expression a mixture of awe and confusion. "Santos, what I just witnessed. That's not standard medical training. Where did you learn to perform procedures like that?" Maria looked around the trauma bay, at the blood-stained equipment and the evidence of 7 lives saved through skills that officially didn't exist. Places that don't appear on any map with people whose names you'll never know. Colonel Harrison appeared at her side, having watched the entire proceedings from the observation deck. Outstanding work, Staff Sergeant. Those men are alive because of you. They're alive because they're tough bastards who refuse to give up, Maria replied. I just gave them a chance. But as she looked around the trauma bay, Maria realized that something fundamental had changed. The careful anonymity she had maintained for 3 years was gone. Every person in that room had witnessed the ghost in action, and word would spread throughout the entire military medical community. There would be no going back to being ordinary. The question now was whether she was ready to embrace what she had always been, or if she would try once again to disappear into the shadows. 3 days after the Delta Force incident, Maria sat in the hospital cafeteria, staring at the untouched coffee growing cold in her hands. She had barely slept since Friday, replaying every moment of the emergency in her mind. The transformation back into the ghost had felt so natural, so right, that it scared her more than any battlefield injury ever had. Mind if I join you? A familiar voice asked. Maria looked up to see Major Carter approaching with careful steps, his chest still heavily bandaged, but his color much improved. Behind him walked Lieutenant Commander Morrison, now using crutches but mobile. You should be resting, Maria said as both men sat down across from her. Doctors cleared me for limited movement, Carter replied. Besides, we needed to talk to you. Morrison leaned forward, his expression serious. Word is spreading about what happened in that trauma bay. Not just here, but throughout the entire special operations community. Maria sighed, knowing this conversation was inevitable. I figured it would. There's something you need to know, Carter continued. We're not the only ones who know about you anymore. Higher command is taking notice. Before Maria could respond, her pager buzzed with an urgent message. Emergency meeting, Colonel Harrison's office, immediately. The three of them exchanged glances, all understanding that Maria's quiet life at the hospital was about to change dramatically. Maria made her way to Harrison's office, finding him in conversation with 2 men in civilian clothes. Their bearing and the way they studied her as she entered made it clear they were intelligence officers of some kind. Staff Sergeant Santos, please have a seat, Harrison said formally. These gentlemen are from Joint Special Operations Command. They have a proposition for you. The older of the 2 civilians, a man in his 50s with sharp eyes and graying hair, spoke first. Staff Sergeant, I'm Deputy Director Clark, and this is Operations Chief Williams. We've been following your recent activities with great interest. Sir, I've been performing my regular duties as assigned, Maria replied carefully. Williams smiled slightly. Regular duties don't include performing emergency thoracotomies in trauma bays or conducting field surgery procedures that save lives other medics would have lost. Clark opened a thick folder and spread several photographs across Harrison's desk. These images were taken during your response to the Delta Force casualties. The techniques you used, the speed of your decisions, the complexity of the procedures you performed in a non-surgical environment. It's remarkable. Maria studied the photographs, seeing herself captured in moments of intense focus during the emergency. The images showed her performing procedures that clearly went far beyond standard combat medic training. What do you want from me? Maria asked directly. We want you to come back, Clark said simply. The joint task force you worked with previously has been reactivated. They need someone with your specific skill set. The words hit Maria like a physical blow. She had spent 3 years trying to escape the world of classified operations and black sites. The thought of returning to that life brought back memories she had worked hard to suppress. I can't, Maria said, her voice barely above a whisper. I can't go back to that. Williams leaned forward. Staff Sergeant, with respect, you never really left. What we witnessed 3 days ago proves that the ghost is still very much alive. You've just been hiding her. There's a reason I requested a transfer, Maria said, her control beginning to crack. Things happened during my last deployment that I'm not sure I can get past. Clark's expression softened slightly. The Pakistan incident. We're aware of what happened there. We're also aware that you blamed yourself for an outcome that was beyond anyone's control. The mention of Pakistan brought everything flooding back. Maria closed her eyes, seeing the faces of the team she couldn't save, feeling the weight of failure that had driven her to seek anonymity in conventional medical service. 3 good soldiers died because I wasn't fast enough, Maria said, her voice thick with emotion, because the ghost wasn't good enough when it mattered most. 3 soldiers died because they walked into an ambush that intelligence failed to detect, Williams corrected firmly. 7 others lived because you performed miracles under impossible conditions. The after-action report made it clear that without your intervention, the entire team would have been lost. Harrison, who had been silent during the exchange, finally spoke. Maria, I've read the classified reports from Pakistan. What you accomplished there under those conditions shouldn't have been humanly possible. The fact that you saved anyone at all was extraordinary. Maria opened her eyes, looking at the three men who were asking her to embrace a part of herself she had tried to bury. If I do this, if I go back to that world, I need guarantees. What kind of guarantees? Clark asked. I choose my assignments. If I believe a mission is too risky or poorly planned, I have veto authority over medical participation. And I want regular rotations back to conventional duty to maintain perspective. The two intelligence officers exchanged glances before Clark nodded. Those terms are acceptable. The teams you'll be working with have specifically requested you. They're willing to accept your conditions if it means having the Ghost as their medic. Williams pulled out another folder, this one marked with classification stamps that made Maria's stomach tighten. There's a mission developing that requires immediate attention. A hostage rescue operation in Syria. The target is a captured CIA operative who has been held for 6 weeks. Intelligence suggests he's been severely tortured and will require immediate advanced medical care upon extraction. The extraction team has requested you specifically, Clark added. They believe the operative won't survive conventional medical evacuation. They need someone who can perform surgery in the back of a helicopter if necessary. Maria stared at the folder, knowing that opening it would mean stepping back into a world she thought she had left forever. The ghost of her former self was pushing to the surface, demanding to be acknowledged. How long do I have to decide? She asked. The mission launches in 72 hours, Williams replied. We need an answer by tomorrow morning. As the meeting concluded and the intelligence officers left, Maria remained in Harrison's office, staring at the photographs of herself saving the Delta Force team. In those images, she could see the focus and intensity that had made her legendary among Special Operations Forces. What do you think I should do? She asked Harrison. The colonel was quiet for a long moment before responding. I think you already know what you're going to do. I think you've known since the moment those helicopters landed 3 days ago. Maria nodded slowly, understanding that Harrison was right. The ghost had never really gone away. She had just been waiting for the right moment to emerge. That evening, Maria visited the recovering soldiers in their hospital rooms. Major Carter was sitting up, his color much improved, reading reports on his tablet. When she entered, he looked up with a knowing expression. You're going back, aren't you? He asked without preamble. How did you know? Carter smiled. Because you're the ghost, and the ghost doesn't hide when soldiers need her. As Maria left the hospital that night, she knew that her decision was already made. The question wasn't whether she would accept the mission, but whether she was ready to stop running from who she truly was. In 72 hours, the ghost would be going back to war. Maria stood on the tarmac at a classified airfield, watching the sun rise over the desert horizon. Her gear was different now, specialized equipment that she hadn't touched in 3 years. The familiar weight of advanced medical supplies, compact surgical instruments, and emergency pharmaceuticals felt both foreign and natural on her shoulders. The team she would be deploying with approached across the tarmac, 12 elite operators from various special forces units. She recognized the type immediately. The kind of soldiers who volunteered for missions that other special operations forces considered too dangerous. The team leader, Master Sergeant David Hawk Patterson, was a veteran Delta Force operator with 20 years of experience. His weathered face and steady eyes spoke of countless missions in the world's most dangerous places. He approached Maria with the confident stride of someone accustomed to command. Ghost, he said, extending his hand. Heard a lot about you. Glad to have you with us. Just call me Maria, she replied, accepting his handshake. I prefer to keep things simple, Hawk smiled. Simple isn't what we brought you for. This mission is anything but simple. He led her to a secure briefing room where the rest of the team was assembled. As Maria entered, conversation stopped and all eyes turned to her. She could feel their assessment, the way elite soldiers evaluated new team members, but there was something different in their expressions, a mixture of curiosity and respect that she hadn't expected. Listen up, Hawk called the briefing to order. Operation Ghostwalker launches in 6 hours. Our target is CIA operative Michael Thompson, captured 6 weeks ago during a reconnaissance mission in northern Syria. Intel suggests he's being held in a Fortified compound approximately 40 kilometers from the Turkish border. The tactical display showed satellite imagery of a remote facility, surrounded by hostile territory. Maria studied the images, noting the limited landing zones and the distance from any friendly forces. Thompson was captured after his vehicle hit an IED. Hawk continued. We have reason to believe he's been subjected to enhanced interrogation techniques. Medical assessment suggests he'll require immediate advanced care upon extraction. Maria raised her hand. What kind of medical intelligence do we have on his condition? Hawk nodded to the intelligence officer who pulled up additional files. Drone surveillance indicates Thompson is barely mobile. Heat signature analysis suggests significant weight loss, possible broken bones, and signs of infection. We're estimating he's lost at least 30 pounds since capture. Maria absorbed this information, her medical training automatically cataloging the challenges they would face. How long from extraction to friendly medical facilities? Best case scenario, 90 minutes by helicopter to the nearest forward operating base, Hawk replied. Worst case, if we have to go to ground and wait for extraction, could be up to 6 hours. The implications were clear to everyone in the room. Thompson would need to be stabilized immediately upon rescue and kept alive during what could be an extended journey to proper medical facilities. This was exactly the kind of scenario that had made the Ghost legendary among special operations forces. What's the enemy situation? Maria asked. Compound is guarded by approximately 20 fighters, the intelligence officer replied. Mix of local militia and foreign advisors. They're well armed but not particularly well trained. However, the area is crawling with hostile forces, and response time for reinforcements is estimated at 15 minutes once we're detected. Maria studied the tactical plan, noting the narrow window for success. So we have 15 minutes to get in, locate Thompson, extract him, and get out before we're overwhelmed. That's the plan, Hawk confirmed. Fast in, fast out, with you keeping Thompson alive long enough to get him home. Over the next several hours, Maria worked with the team to prepare for every medical contingency they might face. She packed specialized equipment for treating torture victims, including collapsed lung repair kits, blood products for massive transfusion, and medications for treating severe malnutrition and infection. As the team conducted final equipment checks and mission rehearsals, Maria found herself slipping back into the mindset that had made her so effective in classified operations. The careful restraint of her hospital work was replaced by the focused intensity of battlefield medicine. Sergeant First Class Tommy Doc Martinez, the team's regular medic, approached her during final preparations. Ghost, I wanted you to know, it's an honor to work with you. I've studied your techniques in advanced medical training. Just focus on backing me up, Maria replied. If Thompson is as bad as intelligence suggests, I'm going to need all the help I can get. As night fell, the team boarded a stealth helicopter for the flight into Syria. Maria checked her equipment one final time, running through mental checklists of procedures she might need to perform under combat conditions. The familiar pre-mission tension settled over her, that combination of adrenaline and focus that she had learned to channel into life-saving precision. The helicopter flew low and fast across the desert, avoiding radar detection as it approached the target area. Through her night vision goggles, Maria could see the compound appearing in the distance, a cluster of buildings surrounded by defensive positions. 2 minutes out, the pilot announced over the intercom. Hawk turned to address the team. Remember, speed is everything. We get in, locate Thompson, and get out. Ghost, you'll have whatever time you need to stabilize him for transport. But be aware that every second we're on the ground increases our risk. Maria nodded, her hands already moving to organize her medical equipment for rapid deployment. This was the moment she had been training for her entire career, the culmination of years of specialized education and experience in the world's most dangerous places. As the helicopter began its approach to the landing zone, Maria felt the familiar transformation taking hold. The quiet, reserved hospital medic was gone, replaced by the Ghost, the legendary combat medic who could save lives under impossible conditions. The ropes were deployed, and one by one the team fast-roped into the darkness. Maria went down fifth, her medical pack secure on her back, her mind already focused on the wounded CIA operative who was depending on her skills for survival. The mission had begun, and the Ghost was back in her element. As they moved toward the compound under cover of darkness, Maria could feel the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. Somewhere in that fortified building was a fellow American who had endured weeks of torture, whose life now depended on her ability to perform medical miracles under combat conditions. The assault team reached the compound perimeter and began their breach. Maria stayed close behind the lead elements, ready to move to Thompson's location the moment it was secured. In her earpiece, she could hear the steady reports of the team's progress as they systematically cleared the building. "Target located," came Hawk's voice. "Ghost, we need you here now." Maria sprinted toward the sound of Hawk's voice, knowing that the next few minutes would determine whether Michael Thompson would ever see home again. Maria rushed into the dimly lit cell where Michael Thompson lay chained to a concrete wall. The sight that greeted her was worse than anything the intelligence reports had suggested. Thompson was barely recognizable as human, his body ravaged by weeks of systematic torture and neglect. "Jesus," whispered one of the operators behind her. Maria immediately dropped to her knees beside Thompson, her hands moving with practiced efficiency to assess his condition. His breathing was shallow and labored. His skin was pale and clammy, and she could see obvious signs of multiple untreated injuries. But his eyes were open, and when they focused on her, she saw a flicker of hope. "American?" Thompson whispered through cracked lips. "That's right," Maria replied, her voice calm and reassuring despite the horrific scene. "I'm Maria. I'm here to take you home." While two operators worked to cut Thompson's chains, Maria began her rapid assessment. Multiple fractures, signs of internal bleeding, severe dehydration, and what appeared to be a serious infection. This was medical triage under the worst possible conditions. "Ghost, we've got movement outside." Hawk's voice crackled through her earpiece. "Hostiles approaching from the north. We've got maybe 10 minutes before this place is crawling with bad guys." Maria's hands never stopped moving as she worked to stabilize Thompson. She inserted an IV line and began pushing fluids, administered pain medication, and quickly splinted what appeared to be a badly broken arm. But she could see that his injuries were far more extensive than could be treated in the field. "Thompson, can you hear me?" she asked, checking his pupils with a small flashlight. "Yeah," he managed to whisper. "Been better." Despite everything he had endured, Thompson's sense of humor was intact. Maria smiled grimly, recognizing the resilience that had kept him alive through 6 weeks of captivity. "I need you to stay with me," Maria said as she worked. "We're going to get you out of here, but I need you to fight a little longer." She could hear gunfire erupting outside as the team engaged approaching enemy forces. The sound of automatic weapons and explosions grew closer, but Maria forced herself to focus entirely on her patient. This was what she had trained for, what had made her legendary among special operations forces. "Ghost, we need to move now," Hawk called urgently. "The LZ is getting hot." Maria made a critical decision. Thompson's condition was too unstable for conventional transport. She would need to perform emergency procedures during the extraction itself, keeping him alive while under fire and during a dangerous helicopter evacuation. "I need a stretcher and 2 operators to carry him," Maria called out, "and I need to work on him continuously during movement." The team quickly improvised a stretcher from equipment in their packs, while Maria continued her emergency treatment. She could see that Thompson had internal bleeding that would require immediate surgical intervention, but there was no time for proper procedures. "This is going to hurt," she warned Thompson as she made a small incision to insert a chest tube. His lung had partially collapsed, probably from broken ribs, and she needed to reinflate it before they moved him. Thompson gritted his teeth but didn't cry out as Maria worked. The chest tube immediately improved his breathing, but she knew this was just buying time. He needed a real hospital, and he needed it soon. "Moving," Hawk announced as explosions rocked the building around them. The team began their fighting withdrawal from the compound, with Maria staying beside Thompson's stretcher as they moved. She continued to monitor his vitals and adjust his treatment even as bullets flew around them. This was battlefield medicine at its most extreme, and Maria found herself operating on pure instinct and training. The journey to the landing zone took 15 minutes that felt like hours. Maria never stopped working, performing procedures she had only read about in medical journals. She managed Thompson's blood pressure with carefully administered medications, treated his pain while keeping him conscious, and continuously assessed his condition for signs of deterioration. "LZ in sight," one of the stretcher bearers called out. But as they approached the helicopter, Maria could see that Thompson was crashing. His blood pressure was dropping rapidly, and his breathing was becoming more labored despite the chest tube. She had minutes, maybe less, before he went into irreversible shock. "Get him on the bird," Maria shouted over the rotor noise. "I need to operate immediately." The helicopter lifted off under fire, with Maria working frantically over Thompson in the cramped passenger compartment. Using equipment she had never expected to use outside of a hospital, she began emergency surgery to stop his internal bleeding. "Talk to me, Ghost," Hawk called from his position by the door gun. "He's bleeding internally," Maria replied, her hands working inside Thompson's abdomen. "I'm trying to find the source, but conditions aren't exactly ideal." The helicopter banked sharply to avoid ground fire, throwing Maria against the bulkhead. But her hands never left Thompson's body, and she managed to maintain her position over the surgical site. "Got it," she announced, finding the torn blood vessel that was causing the internal bleeding. Using a technique she had learned during her classified training, she managed to clamp the vessel and stop the bleeding. Thompson's vital signs immediately began to improve. His blood pressure stabilized, his breathing became easier, and his color started to return. Maria had literally saved his life while flying through hostile airspace in the back of a military helicopter. "How is he?" the pilot called back. "Stable for now," Maria replied, continuing to monitor Thompson's condition. "But he needs a real hospital immediately." The flight to the forward operating base took another hour, during which Maria never left Thompson's side. She continued to adjust his treatment, managing his pain and monitoring for complications. By the time they landed, Thompson was conscious and talking coherently. "You saved my life," Thompson said weakly, as they transferred him to a waiting ambulance. "Just doing my job," Maria replied, but she knew it was more than that. She had performed medical procedures under conditions that would have been impossible for most medics. She had been the Ghost again, operating at a level that separated her from everyone else in her profession. As the ambulance drove away with Thompson stable and headed for full surgical care, Maria found herself surrounded by the operators from the mission. These elite soldiers who had seen combat in every corner of the world were looking at her with unconcealed admiration. "That was incredible," Doc Martinez said, shaking his head in amazement. "I've never seen anything like what you just did." Hawk approached with a serious expression. "Ghost, that man is alive because of you. What you did in that helicopter. That's going to become legend." Maria looked around at the faces of the soldiers who had risked their lives to rescue a fellow American. These were the people she belonged with, the community where her unique skills could make the difference between life and death. "So," Hawk continued, "what do you say? Ready to come back permanently?" Maria thought about the quiet hospital where she had tried to hide for 3 years, about the safe, predictable life she had attempted to build. Then she thought about Michael Thompson, about the Delta Force operators she had saved, about all the soldiers who might need her skills in the future. "Yeah," she said finally, feeling a weight lift from her shoulders. "I'm ready to come back." 3 months later, Maria stood in the same trauma bay where her transformation had begun, but now it was officially designated as a Special Operations Medical Facility. The hospital had been upgraded with equipment specifically designed for treating the unique injuries sustained by elite soldiers. Lieutenant Commander Morrison, now fully recovered and back on active duty, found her reviewing patient files after a particularly challenging day. "Any regrets?" he asked. Maria looked around the trauma bay, at the evidence of lives saved and soldiers returned to their families. She thought about the missions she had completed since returning to classified service, about the men and women who were alive today because the Ghost had been there when they needed her most. "None," she said with certainty. "This is who I'm supposed to be." The Ghost was no longer hiding in the shadows. She had embraced her destiny as the medic who could save lives under impossible conditions, the legendary figure who gave elite soldiers hope that they could survive anything as long as she was watching over them. And in military hospitals around the world, young medics would continue to hear stories about the Ghost, the combat medic who could perform miracles under fire, who never lost a patient who could be saved, and who proved that sometimes legends are real,